For years, they had lived to outsmart each other, rivals in boardrooms and in pride. But one desperate merger forced them into a marriage neither could escape. And now, every look, every word, every near touch felt like a battle and a surrender. Nora Robertson had spent most of her adult life trying not to think about Jack Holt. It was almost a full-time job, forgetting him, forgetting the way he used to lean back in his chair at business school lectures with that maddening half-smile, as if competition was just a game he was destined to win. Forgetting how he'd looked at her after every exam announcement, as though daring her to score higher. Forgetting how, infuriatingly, she always had. Now, years later, she was the CEO of Luminex Innovations, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the city. He was her rival, CEO of Quantum Core, the company she'd beaten to 2 major patents, and 3 key investors. They hadn't spoken in years, except in interviews where their rivalry was practically legend, and yet here they were, sitting across from each other at the long marble table of a private conference room, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. Jack's voice was calm, but his eyes, sharp, steel gray, and unreadable, tracked her every move. "You read the proposal?" "I did," Nora said, matching his tone. "It's almost impressive how you managed to make a merger sound like a hostile takeover." "Only because that's how you'll treat it," he replied smoothly, leaning back in his chair. His cufflinks caught the light, the small, deliberate flash of control. "Let's not pretend we trust each other." "I don't pretend anything with you, Holt." He smiled faintly, and the expression sent an unwelcome flicker through her chest. "That's the only thing I've ever liked about you." Nora inhaled through her nose, reminding herself that this was business. Only business. Their companies were both facing the same threat, a corporate raider buying out their shares and dismantling everything they'd built. The only way to survive was to combine forces and convince their investors the merger was stable, long-term, and apparently personal. The word still made her stomach twist. Marriage. Not a real one. A strategic partnership to project confidence to traditional investors. But the headlines would spin it into something far juicier. She'd already seen the mock press release. Tech titans tie the knot, the merger of love and logic. Love and logic. She wanted to laugh. "I still think this idea is absurd," she said, glancing over the contract. "The investors don't need a fairy tale. They need results. They need reassurance," Jack countered. "And since you have a reputation for being emotionally unavailable, we need to sell stability." Her eyes snapped up. "Excuse me?" He didn't flinch. "Don't look at me like that. I have the same problem. We both come off as too driven, too detached. This gives them a narrative. It makes us human." "Fake human," she said. "Better than broke human," he replied. The silence that followed was taut, threaded with unspoken memories. There had been moments, tiny, unguarded moments in their past, when she'd thought maybe their rivalry had been something else, something neither of them could afford to admit back then. But those thoughts were dangerous now. She closed the folder with a soft thud. "Fine, let's do it. But this is a partnership, not a performance. You don't get to tell me how to play my part." Jack stood, buttoning his suit jacket with unhurried precision. "Nora, everything you do is a performance. You've just never had an audience as big as this one." Her jaw tightened. "You're insufferable. And you're predictable," he said quietly, stepping closer. Not enough to touch, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. His voice dropped, almost a murmur. "You always rise to a challenge." It shouldn't have affected her. But it did. Her pulse tripped, a traitor against her will. She straightened, refusing to let him see it. "Then I guess you'll finally see me win one more time." His gaze lingered on her a heartbeat longer than it should have. Then he turned toward the door. "Press conference is at noon tomorrow. Don't be late, Mrs. Holt." Her fingers curled around the file. "Don't push your luck." The next day, the world watched. Flashbulbs exploded. Microphones thrust forward. Every outlet in the city buzzed with the news. Two industry rivals, united in a sudden, shocking partnership. The cameras captured their every move. Nora in her sleek black suit, Jack in tailored charcoal. Their handshake was brief, precise, utterly professional. Until it wasn't. Somewhere between the CEO smiles and the flashes, his hand closed around hers, firm and steady, fingers brushing against her pulse. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't even necessary, but her breath caught, just slightly, and his thumb pressed once against her hand. A silent message no one else could see. For one dizzy second, the sound of the cameras vanished. It was just him, his steady gaze, the heat between them that years of rivalry had only fed. She withdrew her hand too quickly, turning to the microphones with perfect composure. "We believe this partnership will be a defining moment for the industry," she said, her voice smooth, measured. Beside her, Jack added, "We've competed for years. It's about time we learned what happens when we stop fighting each other and start fighting together." The crowd ate it up. Flashbulbs burst again, but Nora barely heard them. Because Jack's hand brushed hers again. Light, deliberate, almost as if he was testing how much distance she'd allow. She didn't pull away this time, not because she wanted to play along, but because some part of her, buried deep under pride and anger, wanted to know what it would feel like if she didn't. When the cameras finally stopped, Jack leaned close enough for only her to hear, his voice low and calm. "Congratulations, partner," he said, his breath warm near her ear. And as she turned to face him, their eyes locked, a silent promise sparking between rivals who just made the most dangerous deal of their lives. The silence of Jack Holt's penthouse felt too big, too deliberate. Like even the walls knew how much power he carried. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering sprawl of the city below, its skyline reflected in the dark marble floors. Everything gleamed, controlled, minimal, cold. Nora stood by the glass, arms crossed, trying not to show how out of place she felt in his world. He moved with that same easy confidence he'd always had, one hand loosening his tie, the other setting down 2 glasses of wine on the sleek coffee table. "I don't drink when I'm working," she said automatically. He glanced over his shoulder, amused. "And are we working right now?" She hesitated. "We're always working, Holt." Jack smiled faintly, pouring a second glass anyway. "Then maybe that's your problem." Nora's eyes followed him as he walked toward her, slow, unhurried, as if he was giving her time to decide whether to step back. She didn't. He handed her the glass. She took it, because refusing would feel like losing some invisible battle. "This arrangement," she began carefully, "is strictly business. I want to be clear about that." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Of course." But his voice was warm, too warm, the kind of tone that made her pulse skip even when she knew better. "The investors will want photos," he continued, almost casually. "We'll need to appear comfortable. Maybe a dinner or 2. A few public outings. Know how this works?" He leaned back against the sofa, eyes gleaming faintly in the city light. "Do you? Because pretending to like me might be harder than you think." She took a sip of the wine to keep from smiling. "I've tolerated worse." "I doubt it," he said softly. There it was again. That subtle electricity, that unspoken challenge that always seemed to exist between them. They could turn a simple sentence into a spark, a look into a full-blown fire. "I suppose we should go over logistics," she said, setting her glass down. "Your PR team will coordinate with mine. And about the shared penthouse. Shared? His brows rose. I thought you'd insist on separate spaces. I did, she said sharply. Your people insisted otherwise. They said the illusion would fall apart if we didn't live it. Jack's mouth curved slightly. So we'll live it then. Her heart thudded once, traitorously. Don't make this sound like something it's not. He moved closer again, close enough for her to see the faint stubble along his jaw, the slow rise and fall of his chest. And what is it, Nora? It's strategy. He smiled. You sound like you're trying to convince yourself. Her eyes flashed. You think this is funny? No, he said quietly. I think it's dangerous. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air charged, heavy with tension neither of them knew how to diffuse. He turned, walking toward the wide expanse of windows. His reflection shimmered beside hers in the glass. Two figures standing too close to the edge of something they couldn't name. You know, he said, his voice lower now. I used to think beating you was the only thing that mattered. Every deal, every pitch. It was about proving I could win. Nora looked at his reflection instead of him. And now? Now I can't decide whether I still want to win, or just watch you burn everything you touch, and somehow still come, outshining. Her throat tightened. You really have a way with compliments. He turned back, and his expression softened. Barely, but enough for her to see the truth flicker beneath the armor. It's not a compliment. It's an observation. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the city below filled the silence, distant, endless, alive. Then he took a slow step toward her, and another. Nora told herself to move, to say something sharp enough to cut through the tension. But she didn't. She stayed where she was, her breath catching as his hand lifted, not to touch, but to trace the air just beside her cheek. You always do that, he murmured. Do what? She asked, barely above a whisper. Pretend you're not affected. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Because I'm not. He smiled again, and it wasn't arrogant this time. It was quiet, knowing. If you say so. The faintest brush of his fingers against her wrist undid every defense she'd built since walking in. It wasn't even a touch, just the suggestion of one. But it sent a shiver up her arm anyway. And then, as if sensing the danger, he stepped back. The distance returned, cool and deliberate. Bedroom's down the hall, he said, his tone suddenly professional again. There's a guest room. Figured you'd prefer that. The air shifted. Nora nodded, forcing her composure back into place. Good guess. Tomorrow's our first public dinner as a couple, he added, glancing at his phone. 7. Sharp. I'll have the car ready. Fine. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. Nora. She looked back. He was standing in the doorway now, his expression unreadable again. That same perfect mask he always wore when he didn't want her to see what he felt. This doesn't have to be a war, he said softly. Not anymore. She held his gaze for a long moment. It's never stopped being one. And with that, she walked past him, her heels clicking against the marble, her heart pounding harder than it should. Later that night, in the quiet of the guest room, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his, steady, unreadable, full of everything unsaid. She told herself it was strategy, a performance, nothing more. But then she remembered that fleeting brush of his hand against her skin. And suddenly, pretending felt a lot harder than she'd planned. In the silence of the penthouse, two rivals lay awake, separated by walls, by pride, and by everything they refused to admit. But even apart, the same thought echoed through them. Both. This was supposed to be business. So why did it already feel like the start of something neither of them could control? The restaurant gleamed with gold light and quiet whispers, the kind of place where deals were signed and alliances were made with the right smile. Nora walked beside Jack, her arm linked through his, every camera flash that followed them a reminder of the lie they were both living. She wore sleek black silk, a dress that skimmed her shoulders and hinted at strength rather than sweetness. Jack, in a tailored charcoal suit, looked every bit the man who owned whatever space he stepped into. They looked perfect together, too perfect. That was the point. But inside, Nora's pulse raced. His hand rested lightly on hers, guiding her through the crowd, and though the gesture was innocent enough, it carried a possessive confidence that made it impossible to ignore. "You're supposed to look like you enjoy this," he murmured under his breath, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I'm here, aren't I?" she whispered back, the corners of her mouth stiff with her practiced smile. He glanced down at her, a spark of amusement in his eyes. "You're here. That's not the same thing as enjoying it. Don't push it, Holt. Wouldn't dream of it." But the faint smirk tugging at his lips told her exactly how much he enjoyed pushing her. They reached their table, positioned, of course, in full view of the crowd. Jack pulled out her chair before sitting across from her. His movements were smooth, controlled, the kind that came from years of people watching him, judging, measuring, envying. He poured her water, lifted his own glass, and for the briefest moment, his eyes lingered on her face like a silent question. The waiter arrived, hovering with reverence. "Mr. Holt, Ms. Robertson, a pleasure to have you both with us. Shall I bring your usual, sir?" Nora raised a brow. "You have a usual here?" Jack didn't look away from her. "Only with company worth impressing." The waiter left, but the silence that followed was anything but empty. Nora forced herself to glance around, the other tables, the polished chandeliers, the photographers subtly pretending to dine while their cameras hid beneath napkins. Every move here was part of the performance. Every word mattered. "So," she said finally, keeping her tone light, "how does it feel to pretend you actually like me?" He leaned forward slightly. "I don't have to pretend as much as you think." Her fork paused midair. "That's a dangerous thing to say." "Only if it's true," she set her fork down slowly. "You're impossible. I've been called worse. The banter should have been routine by now. They'd been sparring like this for years. But tonight, it didn't feel like rivalry. It felt like something that hummed between them. Alive, unpredictable, magnetic. Halfway through dinner, a familiar face appeared beside their table, tall, polished, the kind of man who always knew exactly when to interrupt. Nora's stomach tightened as he leaned in with a charming grin. "Nora Robertson," he greeted, ignoring Jack completely. "You look as stunning as ever. I almost didn't recognize you without a boardroom full of terrified interns." "Daniel," she said, forcing a polite smile. "I see you still specialize in bad timing." He chuckled. "Still sharp. I like that." Jack's expression didn't change, but his jaw shifted slightly, just enough for her to notice. He reached for his wine glass, the movement smooth, deliberate. When he spoke, his tone was even, too even. "Daniel," Jack said, finally acknowledging him. "Good to see you. Didn't realize they let competitors dine this close." Daniel grinned. "Oh, I'm not competing tonight. Just saying hello to an old friend." "Old friend?" Jack repeated quietly. "Interesting." The temperature at the table seemed to drop. Nora straightened. "Daniel, we were just finishing dinner. It was good to see you." Daniel winked. "Of course. You two have fun, whatever kind of partnership this is." As he walked away, Jack's gaze followed, him like a man calculating how many ways to dismantle an empire. When Nora spoke again, her voice was tight. "He's harmless." "Harmless," Jack repeated, his tone calm, but his eyes sharp. "He called you stunning." "It's a compliment, not a crime." He didn't look at you like it was just a compliment. "Jealous?" she asked before she could stop herself. His gaze snapped back to hers, steady, unreadable. "I don't do jealous." "Could have fooled me." He leaned closer, his voice quiet, dark velvet against the low hum of conversation around them. "If I were jealous, Nora, you'd know. I wouldn't bother hiding it." Her pulse skipped. "Good thing you're not, then." Their eyes held, a silent battle neither of them wanted to win. The air between them felt different now, charged with something unspoken but unmistakable. The noise of the restaurant blurred into a distant hum, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them. When the waiter returned with dessert, Nora realized she'd barely eaten. Her stomach wasn't interested in food, not when every look, every word, felt like a step closer to something she wasn't ready to name. Jack's phone buzzed on the table. He silenced it without looking. "You know," he said quietly, "for someone who claims to hate me, you're awfully good at pretending otherwise." "And you're awfully sure of yourself," she said, managing a faint smile. He tilted his head slightly. "Maybe because I've been watching you long enough to know when you're bluffing." Her heart tripped, but she refused to show it. "Keep watching then. Maybe one day you'll figure me out." "I already have," he said softly. And then he smiled. Not his usual sharp, calculated one, but something real, fleeting, and almost tender. It disarmed her more than any argument could have. When they finally stood to leave, cameras flashed again. Jack placed his hand at the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd. It was a protective gesture, but it burned. Outside, the city air was cool, sharp with the scent of rain. The driver opened the car door, but for a moment, neither of them moved. "Good performance tonight," she said, breaking the silence. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Funny, I wasn't acting." She opened her mouth to reply, and couldn't. The look in his eyes stopped her cold. As the car door closed and the city lights blurred past, she realized something she hadn't wanted to admit until now. If this was just a performance, she was already in danger of forgetting where the act ended and where the truth began. Nora told herself it was all pretend, but the memory of Jack's gaze lingered like a touch, steady, claiming, impossible to ignore. And when he caught her looking at him through the reflection in the car window, the faint, knowing smile he gave her made one thing terrifyingly clear. The game was changing, and neither of them was losing anymore. The next few days passed in a blur of board meetings, investor calls, and headlines that read like gossip columns rather than business news. Power couple or perfect lie? One headline teased beneath a photo of them walking out of the restaurant. Jack's hand steady at her back, his gaze unmistakably fixed on her. Nora tried to ignore it. She told herself it didn't mean anything. But every time she saw that image, her stomach twisted with something she didn't want to name. Jack, on the other hand, seemed completely unbothered. He moved through the office with calm precision, his every decision sharp, confident, infuriatingly composed. But there was something new in the way he looked at her during meetings, something that made her pulse trip every time their eyes met. It wasn't rivalry anymore. It was something else, something dangerous. By Friday night, she was exhausted and restless. The storm outside the penthouse didn't help. Rain slashed against the glass walls, lightning streaking across the skyline like the city itself was caught in their tension. She was reviewing reports in the living room when Jack appeared, shirt sleeves rolled up, tie gone. The sight shouldn't have made her pulse jump. But it did. "You're still working?" he asked, walking over to the bar. "It's almost midnight. Someone has to make sure the merger doesn't implode," she said, without looking up. "Not all of us sleep soundly while the world's burning." He poured himself a drink, then another. He handed one to her. "You should try it sometime. Sleep, or trusting me." She glanced at the glass, then at him. "That's a bigger risk than any merger." His smile was faint, but his eyes never left hers. "You really think I'd let either of us fail?" She set the papers aside. "I think you like control, and the idea of failure, especially mine, probably keeps you entertained." He took a slow sip, studying her over the rim. "That's what you think of me. That's what I know about you. Then you don't know me at all." The air between them thickened. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Nora's heart raced faster than she wanted it to. His voice was low, steady, but there was an edge beneath it, something too raw to hide. "You always think the worst of me," he said quietly. "Even when all I've ever done is try to be your equal." Her chest tightened. "Equal? You've spent years trying to outdo me." He took a step closer. "Because it was the only way I knew how to stay close to you." The words landed like a spark in dry air. Nora froze. She wanted to laugh, to deflect, to say something sharp. But the look in his eyes silenced her. "You're lying," she said, barely above a whisper. He shook his head once. "You think I chased the same degrees, the same internships, the same contracts, because I wanted to win? No, Nora. I did it because I couldn't stand the idea of not being good enough for you." Her breath caught. The storm raged outside, but inside everything went still. She began, but he cut her off. "I've spent 10 years pretending that competition was enough, that if I beat you, I'd stop feeling like this. But it never worked. You were always there. Every time I succeeded, it was your voice in my head asking if I'd earned it." He was standing too close now. She could see the faint pulse at his throat, the tension in his jaw, the honesty in his voice that left no space for sarcasm. "Jack," she said softly. "Don't—" "I can't not," he interrupted, his tone breaking for the first time. "Do you have any idea what it's like to want someone you can't even admit you admire?" Her eyes stung. "You don't mean that?" "I do," he said simply. "You just don't want to believe it." The rain hammered against the glass, their reflections fractured in the storm-lit windows. She turned away, trying to steady her, breathing. But he stepped closer, his presence warm and unyielding behind her. "You've always been the only person who could keep up with me," he said. "The only one who made me want more than winning." She looked at his reflection in the glass. "You think saying this will fix anything? That I'll just forget everything we've been through?" "No," he said. "But maybe you'll finally stop pretending you don't feel it too." Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. She wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, that this was just proximity and pressure. But the words wouldn't come. Because somewhere deep down, she knew he was right. She turned slowly, facing him. "What do you want from me, Jack?" He held her gaze. "The truth." Her breath trembled. "The truth is, I don't hate you." Something in his expression softened, just a fraction. The tension in his shoulders eased, replaced by something vulnerable and raw. "Say that again," he murmured. "I don't hate you," she repeated, steadier this time. "I never did." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the beginning of it. Jack took a slow breath. Then maybe we've been fighting the wrong war. For a long moment, neither moved. The storm outside roared, lightning flickering like flashes of memory across the room. And in that charged stillness, Nora realized that whatever came next, victory or loss, it wouldn't be about companies or contracts anymore. It would be about this. Them. She met his gaze and managed a small, trembling smile. You really are impossible. And you're impossible not to want, he said. Quietly. Her pulse skipped. But before she could reply, thunder cracked overhead, a blinding flash lighting up the room. They both turned toward the window instinctively, the world outside awash in silver. When the light faded, he was still beside her, steady, unguarded, close enough that she could feel his warmth. For once, there was no competition, no clever retort, just truth. And in that moment, she realized that somewhere between rivalry and partnership, something had changed. Something real had taken root. Nora thought she'd drawn every battle line possible between them. But as the storm quieted and his words echoed in her mind, I couldn't stand not being good enough for you. She realized this wasn't war anymore. It was surrender, and it terrified her more than losing ever had. The storm had passed by morning. Sunlight spilled across the glass walls of the penthouse, soft and golden, glinting off the skyline that stretched endlessly below. Nora stood by the window, her coffee untouched, watching the city wake. The chaos of the last few weeks, the merger, the headlines, the endless battle for control, felt distant now. All that remained was the echo of last night, of Jack's voice breaking through years of silence. You're the only one who's ever made me want more than winning. She hadn't slept, not because of worry, but because of clarity. When she heard his footsteps behind her, she didn't turn. She didn't have to. She'd known that sound for years, the quiet, assured stride of the man who'd been both her rival and her anchor. You're up early, he said, his tone gentle for once. Couldn't sleep, she replied. Jack moved to stand beside her, hands in his pockets. For a long moment, neither spoke. The quiet between them was no longer charged with tension, only understanding. I meant what I said, he finally murmured. Last night. Every word. She looked up at him then. And what happens now? He gave a soft, almost self-deprecating smile. Now, we stop pretending. Her chest tightened. Pretending what? That this is about business, he said simply. That I can stand next to you and not feel like everything else fades away. Nora's heart stuttered. Jack. He turned to her fully, his expression open, unguarded, something she'd never seen in all the years she'd known him. You've been my rival, my mirror, my biggest frustration. But you've also been the one constant I never wanted to lose. I think, somewhere along the line, I stopped trying to win against you and started trying to be worthy of you. Her throat tightened painfully. There were no clever replies left, no walls to hide behind, just truth. You don't have to be worthy of me, she said softly. You already are. For the first time, he seemed to lose his composure, just a flicker, but enough. A quiet laugh escaped him, filled with disbelief and relief all at once. He reached for her hand, tentative at first, like he was asking permission. When she didn't pull away, his fingers twined with hers. The contact was simple, but it felt like the entire war between them had finally found its peace. Nora looked up at him, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. So, partners then? He squeezed her hand gently. In every way that matters. They stood like that, side by side, sunlight warming their faces, their hands clasped. watching the city that had once been a battlefield now stretch out before them like a promise. For the first time, there was no competition, no victory to claim. Just the quiet certainty that they'd already won, because they'd found each other. In a world built on rivalry and pride, Nora and Jack finally discovered the one thing worth surrendering to: love that never needed to compete, only to belong.